Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today, we begin our mini-series on the topic of the spiritual world. And this is a truly fascinating topic. Some might think, well, I'll find out what the spiritual world is like when I get there. But it's important to understand that reaching the spiritual world isn't automatic. We must first develop the spiritual desire to go there via receiving spiritual knowledge about it, and subsequently we must cultivate the spiritual qualification to reside there, something we'll explore more deeply in an upcoming session. Fortunately for us, the Supreme Person himself, Krishna, introduces us to the topic of the spiritual world in the Bhagavad-gītā. And even more detailed descriptions of the spiritual world are found within the larger text of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which is the scripture that is considered the natural next step after studying the Bhagavad-gītā. Now, these revelations about the spiritual world are not given randomly or vaguely. They are mercifully revealed in the scriptures because Krishna doesn't want us to settle for the limitations, suffering, and impermanence of this material world. After all, we are spiritual beings, and therefore this material world is just not our true home. By describing the nature of the spiritual world, Krishna is not only informing us, he is inviting us to go there. We are the architects of our own fortune or misfortune, and Krishna wants to awaken a spiritual desire within us to return to our original eternal home, the world beyond matter, the spiritual world. Most of us are so accustomed to life in this material world that we don't often, if at all, question its basic conditions. We settle for the fact that there will be material highs and lows, that we will experience happiness and distress, that relationships will sometimes break, that our bodies will age and suffer various diseases, and that at some point we will have to leave our bodies at the time of death for them. From the time that we're in young bodies, we strive to find lasting happiness in the midst of this ever-changing, uncertain material world. But even when we do find moments of happiness, anxiety often follows close behind. Deep inside, many carry a quiet unease, a feeling that something is off, or at least they begin to question, why is there so much suffering in this world? Is this all there is? And these questions arise because we're actually eternal spiritual beings who have somehow found ourselves in a temporary material situation. In the Bhagavad-gītā, Lord Krishna clearly explains the nature of this material world as dukkhalayam ashashvatam, a temporary place filled with miseries. No matter where one receives a birth or body in the material world, or what circumstances one's body is born into, no one escapes the four core miseries that come with a material body: birth, death, disease, and old age for our material bodies. Indeed, in the 8th chapter of the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. In this verse, Krishna is making it clear that regardless of where one receives a birth in the material worlds, whether in heavenly conditions or not, one will experience suffering. And one will ultimately face death for the body, and then subsequently receive another material birth, in other words, another material body, somewhere in the material world. Pretty bleak sounding, right? And yet, Krishna doesn't leave us in despair. In the last sentence of the verse, Krishna refers to another reality, the spiritual world, which he describes to be his own abode. And then he gives us hope that we can attain that personal abode of his, One who attains to my abode, he declares, never takes birth again. Now, in the 15th chapter of the Gita, which we will visit next, we are given further insights into this supreme spiritual abode of Krishna's. In the 5th verse of the 15th chapter of the Gita, we learn that the spiritual world is eternal, as opposed to this material world, which is temporary. And in the very next verse, we learn of another interesting difference between this material world and the spiritual world. In the 6th verse of the chapter, Krishna states, "That supreme abode of mine is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world." And in the purport or explanation to this important verse of the Gita, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada writes, "The spiritual world, the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, which is known as Krishna Loka, Goloka Vrindavan, is described here. In the spiritual sky, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity, because all the planets are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of all those planets, called Vaikunthas, constitutes the shining sky known as the Brahma Jyotir. Actually, the effulgence is emanating from the planet of Krishna, Goloka Vrindavan. As long as a living entity is in this dark material world, he is in conditional life. But as soon as he reaches the spiritual sky, by cutting through the false perverted tree or nature of this material world, he becomes liberated. Then there is no chance of his coming back here. In his conditional life, the living entity considers himself to be the lord of this material world. But in his liberated state, he enters into the spiritual kingdom and becomes an associate of the Supreme Lord. There he enjoys eternal bliss, eternal life, and full knowledge." So this verse from the 15th chapter of the Gita, along with Srila Prabhupada's explanation to it, introduces us further to the nature of the spiritual world, or the spiritual sky, as Srila Prabhupada refers to it. Unlike the material world, the spiritual world is not subject to destruction or decay, and there is no need for sunlight or electricity there. It is self-effulgent, lit by the bodily effulgence or brilliance of the Supreme Person himself. What's more, as Krishna again reiterates in this verse, the souls who reach that spiritual realm never return to this material world. Why? Because they have attained the spiritual consciousness necessary to reside there eternally, and because they have arrived at their actual home, a place beyond death, disease, fear, or forgetfulness of their eternal relationship with Krishna. Now, later in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā, Krishna describes the nature of those who reside with him in the spiritual world. In verse 15.16, he says, "In the material world, every living entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every living entity is called infallible." And in his purport, or explanation to the verse, Srila Prabhupada writes, "As long as a living entity is conditioned, his body changes due to contact with matter. Matter is changing, so the living entity appears to be changing. But in the spiritual world, the body is not made of matter. Therefore, there is no change. In the material world, the living entity undergoes 6 changes: birth, growth, duration, reproduction, then dwindling and vanishing. These are the 6 changes of the material body. But in the spiritual world, the body does not change. There is no old age, there is no birth, there is no death, and also no disease." These verses and explanations give us tremendous encouragement. Srila Prabhupada would describe the spiritual world as the anti-material world. This phrase is important because it highlights that the spiritual world is not just a better version of what we experience here. It is categorically different. It's not a place of less suffering or temporary happiness. It's a realm that is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. While this material world is temporary and filled with anxiety, the spiritual world is our original eternal home. We shouldn't just wish to go there, we actually belong there. As spiritual beings, we are meant for so much more than the suffering and limitations of this material world. In the Brahma-samhitā, another foundational text in the Bhakti tradition, the spiritual world is described in poetic but deeply meaningful terms. It is said therein that in the spiritual world, every word is a song and every step is a dance, but not in a material way. Rather, in that supreme spiritual abode, Krishna, the Supreme, is the center, and every living being is joyfully engaged in serving him with love there. This detail about the spiritual world found in the Brahma-samhitā, that every word is a song and every step is a dance, expresses the pure joy and harmony of that spiritual realm, where Krishna, the Supreme Person, is the loving center, and every living being is joyfully engaged in serving him with pure, loving devotion, or bhakti. And the beauty of it all? The relationship that we have with Krishna, a relationship that we can begin to revive even now through the practices of bhakti yoga, is reciprocal. Krishna doesn't merely receive our love, he lovingly responds. In the spiritual world, there is no loneliness, no envy, and no fear. Only deep, ever-expanding connection with the Supreme Person, shared with countless others who are also joyfully engaged in loving service to Krishna. It is a world of harmony, reciprocal love, and permanent happiness. Unlike in this material world, in the spiritual world, all living beings are perfectly situated in their eternal identity, acting in harmony with the Supreme Person, Krishna, in an individual and personal relationship of loving service. There is no envy, no selfishness, and no separation from the Supreme there. And this isn't some vague or abstract ideal, it's a real place, described in vivid detail in the Gita, the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the Brahma-samhitā, and other texts in our Bhakti tradition, as well as by all of our great acharyas or teachers in Bhakti Yoga. And what's more, Srila Prabhupada emphasized again and again that we all have a place in that spiritual world. In other words, no one is left behind. The invitation to return to the spiritual world is open to all. But we must genuinely desire to go there, and then subsequently qualify ourselves by cultivating spiritual life instead of remaining absorbed in material life. Simply believing in the spiritual world isn't enough to take us there. Just consider how difficult it is, even in this material world, to qualify for travel to another country. You need a passport and sometimes a visa. You have to go through airports and security checks. You have to have the time and money to travel, etc. It's not automatic. In the same way, entry into the spiritual world also requires preparation and qualification, not of paperwork, but of our hearts and consciousness. And Bhakti Yoga is the process that equips us for one day entering the spiritual world. It provides us with the spiritual practices we need to purify our consciousness and awaken our dormant love for the Supreme. The relationship we have with Krishna is eternal. It simply needs to be uncovered. And when it is uncovered by our spiritual practices, we become qualified to return to that spiritual realm where we can act on our unique, loving relationship with Krishna eternally. In his purport to chapter 15, verse 6, Srila Prabhupada writes, "One should be captivated by this information. He should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from this false reflection of reality. For one who is too much attached to this material world, it is very difficult to cut that attachment. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One has to associate himself with devotees, those who are in Krishna consciousness. One should search out a society dedicated to Krishna consciousness and learn how to discharge devotional service. In this way, he can cut off his attachment to the material world. Actually, every nook and corner is the property of the Supreme Lord, but the spiritual world is paramam, full of 6 opulences: wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. The Katha Upanishad also confirms that in the spiritual world, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, or stars. For the whole spiritual sky is illuminated by the internal potency of the Supreme Lord. That supreme abode can be achieved only by surrender to the Supreme and by no other means." So just how do we become qualified to live in that supreme eternal abode, a realm completely transcendental to all the sufferings of this material world? In our next session, we'll explore exactly that in detail. We'll discover that the key is devotional service to Krishna, the practice of Bhakti Yoga, and the gradual development of deeper and deeper love for the Supreme. Ultimately, devotional service to Krishna is not something artificial or imposed from the outside. It's our original nature. We've simply forgotten it. We have a case of spiritual amnesia, if you will. But not to worry. Through the powerful spiritual practices of Bhakti Yoga, we begin to remember our eternal relationship with Krishna and learn all the wonderful details about that relationship. So that's all we have for today on our introduction to the nature of the spiritual world. Please let us know any questions you have from this part 1 so that we can answer them in our next session. We look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.